Hello and welcome, or indeed welcome back to Real Menopause Talk Season 5, which is going to be a bit of a mini-series, and we're going to do things a little bit differently, but essentially the format is the same, and I'm very pleased to be back and to have you back here too. My guest today is Leslie Kenny. Her story is truly remarkable. Having been told in her 30s she had 5 years to live, she is now here to tell you that our 60s are the new prime. We cover so much, and Leslie gives so much insight into aging and aging well. We talk about skin, hair, the connection between fasting and thyroid health, which might not be what you think, autophagy, the cell renewal process, biomarkers, sleep, especially deep sleep, and how to keep your mood elevated, even during the winter, which I feel is particularly apt given that we are now in the dog days of summer. If you are interested in increasing your health span, and this is not just longevity, then here is Leslie to tell you more. Oh, and do stay to the end for discount codes, or you can find them in the show notes as well. Here's Leslie. Leslie, it is so exciting to meet you because I have read not sufficient about you, but as much as I could possibly find. And I'm very excited to hear all about your work and what you do. First of all, could you tell everybody who's listening a little bit about yourself, your background, maybe where you come from, your family, just so people get an idea of Leslie the person?
Absolutely. Well, I started my journey into healthcare at age 39 when I woke up one day, was cutting some Christmas ornaments, and noticed some pain in my hands. And as I went through the day, I realized I was having difficulty turning doorknobs and faucets on, and thought, that's really strange. This feels the way I imagine arthritis does. So I then went to my doctor and said, I think I've got something akin to arthritis, but I'm only 39, so I am sure it's not arthritis, but could you check anyway? And she checked, and I got the phone call from the doctor's office with the results, only it wasn't the nurse calling to say, it's fine, don't worry. It was actually the doctor who was asking me to come in to have a chat. And you always know that it's not good if the doctor wants to have a chat with you. She had me in and said, you were right, gold stars for properly diagnosing that you do indeed have arthritis. You have rheumatoid arthritis, and here are the drugs that you'll need to inject yourself with to basically suppress your immune system, which looks like it's fighting cancer, only instead of fighting cancer, it's actually trying to destroy your own joint tissue. And these were immunosuppressants to essentially dampen my immune system's response so that I couldn't have that overreaction. But the flip side of that was, she said, because your immune system is going to be weakened, you really should avoid social situations, any situations with young children, because they tend to carry a lot of illness, and things like concerts, galleries.
And at age 39, you're being told to avoid social situations.
Exactly. So at 39, I thought, I still want children. I don't want to avoid them. I'm a very gregarious person. I'm very sociable. I like to go out. I like to go clubbing. You're telling me to avoid all these things that give me joy in life? So I really thought it was not a great answer, but okay, she's the doctor. I'm sort of shocked by this news. Let's carry on and see what else she has to say. And she then said, so that's the news with the rheumatoid arthritis. Unfortunately, you've also come up for something called lupus. And there's nothing that we can do for lupus. Unfortunately, there are no drugs to manage it. Of course, I said, what do you mean there are no drugs to manage it? You're the person in the white coat with the stethoscope and the wonderful framed certificates on the back of your wall. You must have the answer. That's what I'm here for. I'm paying for you privately. Give me the right answer. And she said, unfortunately, there is no answer for this, and you will just get progressively worse. And I said, do you know how inconvenient this is? Because I am doing my 5th round of IVF right now, and I am using donor eggs. This is not just a hard process to put my body through, but I have had to hunt through the United States, high and low, to find another Eurasian donor willing to actually give me her eggs to implant into my uterus. Not easy, right?
Right.
And the doctor looked at me and she just shook her head and she said, I wouldn't do it. You've got a good 5 years left.
Wow. I don't even know how I would respond.
That is pretty stunning.
Yes. That must have been a tremendous shock.
And that's exactly it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a huge shock, and it does sort of stop all conversation dead in its tracks, because as a patient, you have no comeback. What do you now? You were talking to me about managing my arthritis. Now you're telling me not only do I have an incurable disease with no treatment, but that I have 5 years left, and I'm supposed to give up this dream of having a family. So it was a lot to take on board. And the one good thing was that I had the presence of mind to say, could it have been a false positive? She said no. I said, but can I take the test again? And her answer was, it's your insurance, go ahead. So I resolved to leave that office and learn everything I could about my illness. It's sort of like the art of war. The first step is to really know your enemy well. And in this case, I needed to understand this disease of which I had never heard before. And when I began to dig deeper into it, I realized that the root cause of both the rheumatoid arthritis and the lupus was inflammation. Now, a lot of us have heard about inflammaging. And in fact, I was aging prematurely. Although I was chronologically 39, I was aging so much more rapidly that my immune system became dysfunctional and became unable to properly identify self tissue from non self. So it was just friendly fire all over the place. Unbeknownst to me at that time, it had already destroyed about 7/8 of my thyroid. So there were all these things going on. I was digging in. I saw inflammation as a culprit, which we now know is one of the 12 hallmarks of aging, down which we age. And I thought, if I can just do anything to tamp down that inflammation, quench the fire a bit, that will help, right? And I am a big believer in comparative gains. And I know the UK cycling team did that. Let's pick up 1% gain here, 1% gain there, and all together it will be something big and meaningful. So I started to do that. And then I also came across some research into a novel therapy called intravenous immunoglobulin. So this was basically where they took plasma from hundreds of people and they put it into a transfusion, and they were giving it to patients who had autoimmune conditions like I did. And although they were small groups of people, they were in some cases fully putting these people into remission. And when I saw that, I thought it sounded promising. I asked if I could do it. I got permission to do it, got a doctor to prescribe it for me. I did ask doctors in the UK, in the US, where I was getting treated at the time, what about this? Interestingly enough, huge numbers of people told me not to do it because they were worried that there might be something like hepatitis C or mad cow disease in the plasma that had not yet been identified. And of course, here in Britain, we'd had that big blood, that blood scandal as well with the hemophiliac. So I do understand that. But in my mind, I thought, I've been told I've got 5 years left. So I can either wait for this to happen or I can go down fighting. And I chose to go down fighting. And to be honest, I think that is what made the difference. I had to be proactive. And when I went back to get my test done within 6 months, I was in full remission. And I'll never forget when the doctor opened the file to look at my results and said, well, look at that. You don't have lupus anymore and your RA is gone. And I just thought, wait. It was as if somebody had pulled back the curtain on the Great Oz.
Yes.
And I just thought, I don't believe this, right? Because we give our power and trust to medical practitioners. And of course, I am in awe of what they do, but they do not know all the answers. And I think that's the mistake that we patients make, is thinking that we can outsource our healthcare to a third party who sees us for maybe at most half an hour or an hour, say if we go private. We've got to take control.
So, Leslie, do you have a medical background?
I don't. I'm just a patient.
Just a patient, and you took the bull by the horns to go and research this for yourself.
Yes, because when it's life or death, it's amazing the things that you can do, right?
Well, yours is clearly one of them. And 6 months seems like the tiniest amount of time. I mean, if you look at it in proportion to 5 years, it's quite a percentage, but you've just added exponential amounts of time to that supposed 5 years.
Exactly. So there are a couple of other statistics I should mention. The intravenous immunoglobulin cost $12,000 for each infusion. So I did 2, so $24,000 US. And I've calculated that had I gone on to the immune suppressants and been on them all this time, by the way, they stop working after a number of years. You've got to go on to methotrexate, which is a chemo drug, very hard, destroys your eggs. If you want babies, forget it. I would have spent over 1.1 million US dollars versus a 24,000 hit at the beginning. The other thing is that I had my biological age tested in August of last year by GlycanAge, and which is based in London. And my biological age, according to them, is 21. So
that's amazing.
I'll be 59 in June. And so the idea that I could possibly have reversed my biological age, having been given a prognosis of 5 years at 39, if that doesn't say we have the power to rejuvenate ourselves using lifestyle and breakthrough medical technologies, I don't know what does.
That is truly remarkable and extraordinary, and one of the best stories I've heard. So obviously, we're going to talk about Spermidine and the work that you're doing at Oxford Healthspan. I have to pause for a moment and then ask, well, given that you're 59 and were wanting to have children when you were diagnosed originally, whereabouts are you but now you're biologically 21, whereabouts are you in terms of perimenopause or menopause?
I'm postmenopausal, so and I'm on BHRT. And I also have been on thyroid hormone for, many, many years, since around 2007. And in fact, it was really the addition of the thyroid hormone to my protocol that allowed me to naturally get pregnant and have a baby, deliver a baby at 43.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
A little bit late, congratulations, but still, that's a very happy story. I'm very pleased.
Yeah, I was too. I was thrilled.
Yes, of course. So how was the menopause experience for you? Did you notice anything, or was the rest of life all consuming at the time?
At that point, I had started to get back into work again. So my eldest is adopted. My youngest was at that point probably I don't know, 8, 9, something like that. And I started looking at work again part-time and noticed I would go into meetings and would just think, good heavens, it's so hot. And I just start stripping off scarves, sweaters, and seeing guys there dressed in jackets and ties, thinking, why aren't they so hot? And realizing that this was, one of the classic signs of menopause. And to be honest, I think what it was I was fasting at the time. I was doing a lot of extreme fasting. And I think I may have actually overdone it and brought the menopausal signs forward, because that's not the kind of experience that my mother had. And I ended up going through menopause around age 50, 51, and really needed to then add in the progesterone for sleep. Because, of course, I'd started the work, going back into the workforce. I had all of the pressures that we have in midlife, parents, children, work, home, and your cortisol goes up and your adrenaline goes up, and your need to make more cortisol to deal with things almost on a 24-hour basis means that you're basically using all of your progesterone to make that cortisol at exactly the time that your progesterone dips, and it means that your sleep is rubbish, right?
Yes, I'm
So we
familiar.
need progesterone to sleep. But then, yeah, exactly. But then here we are, we've got all of these demands on life, and we've got to make cortisol. So the body says, okay, I'll just take Peter, rob Peter to pay Paul, right? And the result is we don't sleep well. And once you stop sleeping well, you begin to spiral, right? So it's, and that's beauty sleep too, right? We sort of see when we don't have good sleep, we see it on our faces.
Absolutely. I think the skin is a very clear indicator, or it's a strong indicator of how you're operating on the inside, both mentally and physically. So yes, it does all
Exactly.
show.
I'm a big believer in skin and hair and nails as kind of external biomarkers of what's going on inside.
So I would love to, that's a beautiful segue, love to get onto the biomarkers and hallmarks of aging.
Sure.
You mentioned that there are 12 of them. What are they, and what can we do to support ourselves? So to add to that, just to make it a really long question, you mentioned lifestyle earlier as well. So
sure.
We need to get into the Spermidine as well as what you're doing to support yourself. But I would love to know what the 12 hallmarks are.
Absolutely. Okay, so the 12 hallmarks, a number of them you and your listeners will be familiar with. So they're things like stem cell dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction, gut dysbiosis, for instance, inflammation, impaired autophagy. So that is impaired cell renewal. And that's probably one that I should go into a little bit more. But there are also things like epigenetic changes, impaired protein folding, impaired intercellular communication, telomere shortening, DNA protection and repair, altered nutrient sensing, and cell senescence. You might have heard of zombie cells. These are cells that they've finished as many replications as they can safely do. This is the one where you're thinking about photocopying your DNA and you do lots and lots of copies, and the copies are no longer so clear. When it gets to a point where it's not so clear, then it becomes a zombie cell, and the body silences it, stops it from replicating. But that cell, which sort of hangs about, continues to emit inflammation, and it can actually zombieize the cells around it. So the idea is you want to clear those cells, or in the case of Spermidine, you want to actually see if you can rejuvenate those senescent immune cells. And that is something that Spermidine does, and it's quite interesting for that reason, because immune aging, we all know relatives who've gotten pneumonia at, say, age 85, and everybody thinks, oh, they're a goner, right? But we don't think that if they're 25. And the difference is that the immune system has become dysfunctional. It has gotten clogged with these senescent immune cells. And what Spermidine can do is go in and actually rejuvenate that cells, not just clear them, but rejuvenate them.
That's extraordinary for a plant, and a very simple part of the plant, to be able to have that kind of power.
Yes.
So we've mentioned Spermidine a few times because it's your life's work, or certainly part of it. And I've been reading about it and trying it out for myself.
Oh, great.
But many of the listeners may not know what we're talking about.
Okay.
So could you explain?
Sure. Well, first of all, in relation to the 12 hallmarks of aging that I just mentioned, Spermidine is the only plant or material that can actually inhibit 9 out of 12 of those hallmarks. So some molecules that we've heard of, say like NMN or NAD, these things can inhibit maybe 3 at best. Not so many, or lithium can do that with, I think, about 3 hallmarks. But Spermidine is quite unusual in its ability to impact so many hallmarks. Now, it's got an unusual name. There's no getting around it. That is, of course, because it was first identified in male semen. But it's a bit of a misnomer because women make it in copious quantities in our breast milk. It's so important for the survival of the next generation that it is present in breast milk for growth of the baby and for maturation of the nascent gut lining. So that gut lining, in order for babies to get ready to take on non-breast milk, solid foods and things, that lining of the gut, which is only one cell thick, needs to be sealed up. And there are immune cells that line the gut. And you need to make sure that the immune cells have a proper response to food that is coming in from outside and does not start to create inflammation. And that immune activation is done by spermidine too. So it's really crucial for babies. I've already mentioned that it's very important. It's very important in reproduction as well because of its presence in semen. It also helps men when they manufacture semen because creating sperm is actually a very high reactive oxygen species event. Most people think, sperm is very easy. Guys get excited all the time. Super easy. Actually, you don't realize that, in fact, it's like going to a party and getting a bit drunk, right? Very easy for guys to do, but they're going to have a bit of a hangover. And the reactive oxygen species is, it's aging, and the spermidine is there as a natural anti-inflammatory to tamp down the inflammation that is caused by that event. So we continue to produce spermidine in our gut lining and in our tissues. But as we get older, we are less able to manufacture it in our tissues. And it really depends then on the integrity of our gut and the quality of our diet. So if we have had exposure to a lot of broad spectrum antibiotics, the populations of healthy bacteria that are capable of manufacturing spermidine may have been wiped out. That is then a problem. Or they may be very small. And therefore, we need to feed those colonies of healthy bacteria capable of producing spermidine with prebiotic fiber. And where do we get prebiotic fiber? From plants, right? So that's one of the reasons why lifestyle choices are so important. As a matter of fact, there's a University of Newcastle study that came out last year in Nature that said that changing diet alone could actually give you an additional 10 years of healthy lifespan. Of course, one of the benefits is going to be, if you have that good plant fiber, you will be feeding the colonies of bacteria that not only manufacture spermidine, but manufacture things like B vitamins or serotonin, right? 90 to 95% of one of our happy molecules, serotonin, is manufactured in the gut. Mm-hmm. So thank goodness we have people like Tim Spector who have really brought awareness to the microbiome. But this is all new in the last decade. So we can get spermidine from our diet, as I just alluded to, and there we get it from plants. So all plants have spermidine. The dandelion in your garden has some spermidine. The rocket from the Waitrose you go shopping at has spermidine in it. They all do, but they have varying amounts, and certain plants have more than others. So shiitake mushrooms are very high in it. Lentils, legumes have lots. And in Japan, they have a fermented soy dish called natto, which has the highest concentrations of spermidine that we have found in any dish anywhere in the world. Fermented foods, kimchi, sauerkraut will have them, assuming you can deal with the histamine load from those fermented foods. And cheddar cheese also has high amounts of spermidine. If you can deal with the trade-off between the fat and the spermidine, that's another source.
That's all amazing. And the power of diet is not lost on me personally, and certainly with many clients that I've worked with. Once you begin to really hone in on what feels good and clearing up your gut health and certainly microbiome, it can transform the way you feel and act and the way you move through life. Even brain fog for those who experience that, which are many in menopause. And it's certainly even had a positive impact on my eldest daughter who has ADHD. Making sure that her gut is functioning well has had a very positive impact on her brain function as well. In addition to that, I certainly talk a lot with my clients about health span as opposed to lifespan. And you talk very movingly about caring for your grandmother in Indiana in her final year of life. So for those who are unfamiliar, can you explain the difference between health span and lifespan?
Well, that's a really relevant example. My grandmother, I was incredibly close to her and lived with her for a number of years. I was the only grandchild. And so when she was diagnosed with glioblastoma, a brain tumor, my uncle and I knew we didn't want her in a nursing home. So I went back to the Midwest from California. I withdrew from Berkeley, where I was at university. And essentially, she was in a coma for that last year of life. The chemo drugs caused her to gain weight. The tumor began to take over. She was fed through a tube. So while she lived an additional year, people will say, oh, she died at age 67. In fact, she really died, in my mind, at age 66. The instant she entered that coma, and we were unable to engage with her, and she was able to interact with us, that was the end of her health span. My beef with the medical community sometimes, particularly in the United States, where it is life extension at all cost or at any cost, is what is the trade-off on quality of life? Her last year of life was really not happy. And it was frankly not easy for my uncle nor myself. But of course, we would do anything for her if there was some chance of her being able to be cured. But the reality was that there was no chance. She was too frail to be operated on. The location of the tumor was was too deep, too difficult an operation. And so, this is the difference between longevity. Her longevity was until age 67. Her health span was until age 66. What we want to do is compress all of those symptoms of older age that we're familiar with, the frailty, the memory loss, the cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmune conditions. We want all of those things, if possible, to happen, honestly, in the last 24 hours. We want the wheels to fall off simultaneously and then die, right? So that we have great health span through as long a time period as possible. So we're constantly able to tap into the joy of life, which we get by being independent, by being socially interactive, by being able to contribute and be with people, right? So that's really the difference between health span and lifespan. And I'm always trying to tell people, you want health span. And interestingly, the difference between men and women, yes, women outlive men by 5 to 10 years, depending on the country you look at. But almost without exception, women outlive men, but in poor health. And that is something I don't want to see happen to my fellow sisters. We have twice the chance of getting Alzheimer's disease that men have. We earn less than men do. How are we, if we are single and silver splitters are really a thing, right? How do we as women take good care of ourselves so that we have our independence and our mobility, and we have the financial wherewithal to get through this period without having something like Alzheimer's strike us down, where we have no idea how our last years of life will be lived? So we've got to be proactive, and diet and lifestyle are ways we can do this. Getting more spermidine into your diet for brain health is one of those. It's one aspect of that story. So I'm always advocating for people to just become more proactive.
That's very much a message that we put out here on the podcast as well. First of all, that midlife is not the end. It is arguably the beginning of the next chapter, the best part. Certainly there are life shifts. Yes, of course, there are many responsibilities, as you've already mentioned as well, either with children or parents or both, work, life, the leaking roof, the shower, whatever it might be. And we want to make sure that we can find the joy in life and continue to live happily. I certainly want to travel. I want to be able to carry my own suitcases, put them in the overhead locker one day. hopefully become a grandparent myself, play with my grandchildren. There's so much ahead. And once you do reach midlife, I feel it's more realistic to think about the future and plan for it well. So living in your old lady body is going to be fierce and powerful and strong. So tell us a little bit about Oxford Healthspan itself and how you might take Spermidine and how you might feel taking it.
Sure. Well, Oxford Healthspan is the company that I started when I learned about this groundbreaking research at the University of Oxford that two women, Professor Katja Simon, an immunologist, and Dr. Gada Al-Saleh, a pharmacist and rheumatoid arthritis expert, were working on. And I was so excited about how Spermidine was rejuvenating immune cells in mice that I thought, in elderly mice, I thought, we've got to bring this to market. But when I looked for funding and talked to the local biotech, people in the local biotech community, they all said, well, you're not going to get funding for this because it's a food. And we only fund things that have intellectual property attached, so synthetic things. And I said, but the food works better. And they said, no, but we don't fund those. And I thought, and why not? Because we could just make a brand and we could get this out to people. Wouldn't you want the thing that was better as opposed to the thing that was patented? So that's what I did. I suppose women, we do have to think a little bit differently, don't we? To get around in this world. And so that's what I did. I created a brand and we called it, I knew Spermidine itself was a terrible name. Within the first second I heard it, because I knew my mother would never be able to say it. So I rebranded it as Primidine for the new prime of life, because I believe firmly that middle life at 60 is your new prime, because we've all been, the huge majority of us are going to be gifted a whole nother lifetime to do what we want with. We don't have to think about kids. We don't have to think about jobs necessarily. We can do what we want, acting in the script that we ourselves have written. So what the product does, and I have two types of Spermidine. One is a gluten-free and the other one is not. It's from wheat germ. People who take it notice almost immediately new hair growth, and usually up here in the corners. And in Japan, when a traditional medical doctor is looking at your health, you know how they might look at your tongue or your nails, skin as well, and hair. One of the places they look is for the baby hair growth here in the corners. And that is a sign of youth. So people notice it there. They notice in some cases that their gray hair lessens. They notice that their nails grow much faster. They notice that their skin becomes tighter. And their sleep. If you have a wearable tracking device like an Oura Ring or a Fitbit, you may notice that your sleep improves. Most people notice it in the deep sleep that is actually really important to stave off Alzheimer's. That's because it is only in deep sleep, which we get between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., that is the only time when the lymphatic system activates. So we have the lymphatic system to get rid of cellulite. The glymphatic system is to actually remove waste from the brain. And the folks at Cornell University who discovered it, actually discovered by a woman, scientist there, she thinks that actually nutrients are also taken to different compartments in the brain at that time of night. So very important to get that deep sleep window. It is something that our clients report again and again. So these are things that they would notice. But what is really happening on the inside is that your cells are activating a really crucial process called autophagy or autophagy. Both their pronunciations are right. That just means it's like pressing the self-cleaning button on your oven, right? You got to do it every now and then to get the gunk out. And that is what autophagy does in the cells. And it is a way by which we remove dysfunctional mitochondria. So mitochondria are the powerhouses, the energy batteries, those Duracell batteries in our cells. If your Duracell batteries get worn out, you need to get rid of them and get something new in. And that's what autophagy does, right? When the Energizer bunny runs down, new batteries in. So you need autophagy to make that happen. And people do report feeling more energy. Another thing that happens is that By supplementing spermidine, you spare your body's cupboards, your store cupboards, like in your kitchen, of something called S-adenosylmethionine, or SAMe. SAMe is often given to people for mood, to kind of improve their mood. And actually, spermidine is made from an amino acid called L-arginine and SAMe. So if you're supplementing, your kitchen store cupboards are actually still intact. So for those moments, like in winter, when you actually need SAMe to keep your mood elevated, you've got some in the kitchen cupboard, right? And you're not going low and feeling a little bit down. So I'd say that and vitamin D, omega-3s are some of my tips for kind of mood in perimenopause and postmenopause. So those are some of the things that they'll notice. But there are also a lot of other studies on cardiovascular health. So, and women have, of course, we do suffer also from cardiovascular disease as we go postmenopause because our hormones protect both the brain and the heart when we're young. As we go past menopause, we don't have that protection. Now, the heart is very interesting. The cells in the heart, the cardiomyocytes, do not replace themselves, not very fast at all. So when we're around 25 years old, 1% of all of our heart cells will replace in 1 year. That's it. Everything else is like a vintage car, and you've got to keep shining the chrome and polishing things to make sure that it runs beautifully. So I was born in 1965, so my cardiomyocytes are like 1965 Ford Mustangs. And this is what I'm going to get. I'm not getting any more. I need to make sure that those Ford Mustangs are in tip-top condition. And one of the ways that I can do this is through autophagy. And I can clean out the gunk in the engine and I can polish things up by using autophagy. So that's with cardiac cells. And it's so important to maintain that health. And obviously, as you know yourself, exercise, mindfulness, yoga, anything to engage the vagus system, these are all very important for heart health too. But specifically with respect to spermidine, that is another thing that it helps with.
That's wonderful to hear because, again, whilst we don't want to be scaremongers at all, cardiovascular health is of critical importance, particularly in midlife. And the risk of women having heart attacks is so much greater than is often given credit for. And the male symptoms are pretty well known, but the female ones are not so. So being able to take care of your vintage Mustang or common gear or whatever you might choose to have is really important and interesting. I love that analogy. When you talk about autophagy, just because you said you were doing some extreme fasting years ago, and many people feel that fasting can help with autophagy, what is your opinion on that?
So I think that fasting works very well for men.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to Dr. Stephanie Estima about this, and she said, with men, their biology is like two buttons, right? Radio button on, radio button off, right? Very, very simple. But with women, it's like the control system for a nuclear submarine. It's really complex. And when we fast, we signal to the body that we are in famine. Mm-hmm. And all sorts of systems in the body get those signals. For instance, the thyroid gets this signal, oh my God, stop producing T3, which is the bioactive form of thyroid hormone, manufacture reverse T3 that blocks the receptors to the cell. So T3 gets into the cell and it creates energy. But if you block that, then you're down regulating metabolism. You're getting ready to essentially hibernate. And if there really was no food and you're a living organism, well, you do what the polar bears do. You are the bears and you hibernate. And that's what happens to a woman's body. And she holds on to fat then. At the same time, it will screw up your hormones. So if you are of reproductive age, these young girls who are doing extreme fasting, what happens? Well, just like female athletes who have very, very low body fat counts, they lose their menstrual cycle. Now, women are at their healthiest when they are in peak reproductive condition. This is just an evolutionary fact. Evolution, Mother Nature does not make mistakes. She allows us to have babies at the times when we are at what she deems to be peak health, right? Because actually manufacturing, producing a living organism and bringing it into the world, these are high resource consuming events. So the female body has got to be in peak condition. And when you then throw the body out of its ability to have a menstrual cycle, then you're not in peak condition anymore. I think what I did, because I still had a cycle, I basically shut down what was left of my reproductive system. And I should have had another 2 years like my mother, but instead I brought it forward because I was doing what all of the tech bros in Silicon Valley were doing. Nothing against, no disrespect to the bulletproof diet. I was one of the early bulletproof coaches, but being in ketosis for so long did not serve my female body's needs.
That is music to my ears, because that is everything that I learn in my weightlifting, bodybuilding world. It's everything that I've read and learned. And so to hear it confirmed by you is just, it's like the icing on the cake.
Glad to hear that.
And so true and so important for people to hear at different ages, different stages of their lives, whether they are wanting to conceive or not. Just knowing the difference between women's bodies and men's bodies amplifies the need for further research on women's health and not just using men as the bar, really. What would be your final parting pearl of wisdom, of which you have dropped so many, but for the menopausal cohort listening in particular?
Well, I think some of the most exciting research that has come out on Spermidine recently, and that's whether you get it from food or you get it from supplement or both, was some mouse studies out of China, which showed that Spermidine given to these mice actually extended female fertility for longer. And this was in a cohort of midlife mice. I love this idea of midlife mice. And it increased the number of oocytes. These are precursors to eggs. And it also enhanced embryogenesis and increased litter size. Now, I know we don't want to increase litter size, but the idea that we are improving egg quality, that is a really big deal, and increasing the number of oocytes, because this is how we look at menopause. What's left, right? How many eggs are left? If that's a button or a lever that we can push on to extend female fertility and reproduction, then we can, by extension, extend optimal female health. If we slow down the aging process in that way, we just push off all of those diseases of aging for another day. So again, extending health span.
Thank you so much for your time, Leslie. I really, really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
Well, you can find me at Oxford Healthspan on Instagram, Leslie's New Prime, Leslie, so the American way, Leslie's New Prime. And that's also on YouTube. I have a lot of videos on gray hair reversal. People keep asking me for those, being 59 and not having to dye my hair. And then the other one is the Oxford Longevity Project. And that is something that's a passion project of mine, to really bring attention to this idea of empowering people to use the latest breakthrough science to increase health span.
Thank you very much again.
Absolutely.
You can find Leslie exactly where she said and visit oxfordhealthspan.com. For the Spermidine discount, use Hattie15. That's HATTY 15, Hattie15. We continue to delve into all things perimenopause, menopause, and in particular post-menopause over the next few episodes. So thank you very much for joining me today. And as ever, drop me a line, Hattie@realmenopausetalk.com, if you have any questions or want to know more about something that we've discussed in any of the episodes. And you can find me on Instagram @realmenopausetalk. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.